Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into the sweet and strange world of Princess Bubblegum, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical, seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up. Let's begin. Tonight, let's peel back the pink-tinted curtain and settle into the quiet, mysterious beginnings of Princess Bubblegum. Now, despite her poised demeanor and royal title, Princess Bubblegum is not your typical ruler. She's not descended from an ancient royal bloodline, nor crowned through conquest. She was made, born not in a crib, but in a lab, molded from a primordial soup of candy and science, ambition, and accidental brilliance. She emerged from what is known as the Mother Gum, a strange living mass of sentient pink goo, a chemical miracle, or perhaps a cosmic joke, left behind in the aftermath of the Mushroom War. From this gum, life began to bubble, literally. Out of its folds, bits and blobs took shape. Some were aimless, some unstable. But one form stabilized. One form began to speak, to think, to build. That form was Bonnibel. No last name. No family history. Just pink matter and a curious mind that never stopped growing. She didn't have a childhood in the way most do. There were no lullabies, no bedtime stories whispered in the dark. Her earliest memories were of laboratories and beakers, of half-baked candy creatures stumbling around in gooey confusion, and of a loneliness so quiet it hummed. But even then, even as a young entity surrounded by uncertainty, Princess Bubblegum stood out. She chose structure. She began naming things, categorizing them, building order from syrupy chaos. She studied the failed candy constructs that had emerged before her, creatures without stability, some dissolving over time, others turning violent or mindless. She began to tinker, to perfect. It wasn't long before she became something of a mother herself, forming the earliest candy people, each handcrafted with care and calculation. Peppermint Butler, a sugar-smooth mix of elegance and something darker. Mr. Cupcake, Cinnamon Bun, Starchy, each with their quirks, their own spark of life. But they were all, in some strange way, her children. And just like that, the Candy Kingdom was born. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying this so far, I'd be so grateful if you subscribed. I put a lot of time and heart into making these videos, and every new subscriber genuinely helps me keep going. Thanks for being here. But here's where things get strange and a little bit sad. You see, while her creations were whimsical and warm-hearted, PB herself remained alone, surrounded by sweetness, yet emotionally distant. Loved by many, but seemingly weighed down by an invisible burden. Perhaps it was the responsibility of being a creator, or maybe it was the knowledge that she wasn't like the others, that while they were created by her, she was created by something she never fully understood. The Mother Gum, her origin, remains one of the deepest mysteries in the land of Ooh. Some say it's a relic of pre-war science, a sentient biomass designed to adapt and survive. Others whisper that it's something older, something alien, a seed of evolution placed on Earth by forces beyond comprehension. Whatever its origin, it birthed not just a ruler, but a guardian, a scientist, a moral philosopher, and sometimes a tyrant. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's stay in these early days for a while longer. Imagine her, young, pink, and full of wonder, wandering the scorched fields of post-apocalyptic Earth. She would have seen the rusted skeletons of cities, strange mutations, ancient ruins crumbling beneath vines in silence. And she would have learned. PB read the signs of a fallen world and decided she would do it differently. Her kingdom wouldn't rely on war or greed. It would be built on science, on intelligence, and control. Sweetness would be her brand. Safety, her promise. But sweetness, as we'll see, can sometimes rot from within. Still, in these first years, Princess Bubblegum was radiant with hope. A new Adam, or perhaps a new Eve, surrounded by beings she had breathed into life. She gave them jobs, titles, personalities. She gave them purpose. She gave them stability. And in turn, they loved her. Not out of duty, but devotion. So much of this period is forgotten history. There were no chroniclers, no historians scribbling notes while PB built civilization from candy and dreams. But traces remain in the architecture of her castle, in the design of her robots, and in the quiet, meticulous routines she keeps even now. You can feel it if you pay attention. That desire to keep everything in place, that fear that one misstep will bring everything crumbling down. Because beneath the sweetness, there's pressure. Pressure to be the perfect leader, to never crack, never falter, to carry the weight of an entire society on shoulders made of gum. But back then, in those quiet beginnings, there was still wonder in her eyes. As you drift off, let yourself imagine that early candy kingdom. Sunlight spilling across lollipop trees, Bubblegum's lab glowing softly in the distance, and a young princess sitting alone at her desk, pencil in hand, sketching the future. She doesn't know yet how complicated things will get, how much it will cost her. She only knows that she must build something better than what came before. And maybe that's enough for now. As the Candy Kingdom began to grow slowly, organically, Bonnabelle did something few rulers ever do. She didn't just lead, she engineered loyalty. She sculpted citizens with hearts made of caramel, minds tuned to cheerfulness, and dispositions programmed to adore. But not in a sinister way, at least not yet. In these early days, it was born from love, a desire to never feel alone again, to never be surrounded by confusion, chaos, or the pain of watching friends dissolve before her eyes. Every candy person was a response to that aching emptiness, a promise to herself that she would never be the only voice in the room again. And so the city bloomed. Gingerbread guards patrolled the gumdrop roads. Peppermint advisors whispered in sweet tones. Cotton candy clouds hovered gently over sugar-coated rooftops. It was a kingdom of dreams, spun from syrup and science. But underneath the joyful surface was a mind constantly working, constantly worrying. Because even in paradise, entropy lurks. You see, the candy people weren't perfect. Some decayed over time. Others acted unpredictably. Some developed ideas, independent thought. It's here that PB's story becomes more complex, because she didn't just want to create life. She wanted to maintain it, keep it safe, keep it obedient. And when something broke the pattern, when a candy citizen began to act outside expectations, she'd correct it, quietly, efficiently. Sometimes with reprogramming, sometimes with removal. There's an unspoken sorrow to all of this, a loneliness wrapped in leadership. Because even though she was never alone anymore, she often felt more distant than ever. She was the mother, the queen, the scientist, the fixer, and there was no one above her to lean on, no equals, just smiling faces she had carefully sculpted. She tried to reach beyond her kingdom occasionally, tried to find peers in science, allies in thought, but most were too strange, too dangerous, or too mortal. And then came the Marceline chapter. The two met in a time when the world was still raw from war, and both carried trauma in different ways. Marceline, immortal, chaotic, emotionally scarred. Bubblegum, eternal in a different sense, but just as wounded. Their friendship, even their love, was never simple. It flickered between tenderness and tension, between closeness and cold detachment. But in the very beginning, it was a lifeline. PB found in Marceline someone who wasn't created by her, someone who could challenge her, see her, laugh with her without being programmed to do so. But even that connection couldn't last, not in its rawest form. PB's obsession with order clashed with Marceline's wild spirit, and so as the Candy Kingdom grew, the gap between them did too. Still, the echoes of those early days never left her. The memories of the Mother Gum, of walking alone through irradiated forests, watching her breath mist in the cold, of sketching out city plans with marshmallow ink and trembling hands, of whispering words to half-formed candy beings, wondering if they would answer back. She didn't have a past like others did. No parents, no ancestral homeland, just memories of pink walls and sterile light, of science as comfort, of silence as companion. Sometimes you might wonder, did she ever look in the mirror and feel like a stranger? Did she ever ask herself, am I a person or just a process? There's a stillness to her that suggests she's thought these thoughts more than once. And maybe that's why she's so obsessed with the stability of her kingdom. Because if everything else stays perfectly in place, maybe she won't fall apart. And yet, despite all this, or maybe because of it, there's a quiet beauty to who she is. A girl made from gum, building a world from scratch. A ruler who never asked to rule, but stepped into the role because no one else could. A mind that never stops calculating, but sometimes, just sometimes, pauses to gaze out over her candy-coated streets and sigh. Maybe in those moments she remembers her beginning. Not as a queen, not as a creator, but as a lone bubble in the dark, rising to the surface and becoming someone. As the years trickled by, one after another like drops of syrup down glass, Princess Bubblegum watched her kingdom transform. From handmade shelters to towering frosting-capped spires, from a handful of sentient sweets to an entire civilization. Yet in the quiet folds of her mind, the same question stirred. Who was she? Really? A monarch? A scientist? A sentient cluster of gum playing at humanity? No matter how bright the lights of the kingdom glowed, no matter how faithfully the candy people smiled up at her, there was always that flicker of uncertainty, that moment just before sleep where doubt snuck in through the cracks. Still, PB rarely let it show. Her days were filled with meetings, repairs, experiments, and the occasional political upheaval. Her nights were long, endless hours in the lab, tweaking formulas, stabilizing the kingdom's ecosystem, recalibrating the molecular bonds of sentient sugar. And then there were the quiet notes she left for herself, scribbled reminders, not just to-do lists, but questions. Is this ethical? Would they still love me if they knew? Am I their ruler or their captor? She never stopped questioning. And that, in its own strange way, is what made her good, if not always kind. But not all memories from those early years were somber. There were moments of unexpected joy. Like the first time Peppermint Butler successfully summoned a harmless demon for a party trick, only for it to accidentally teleport the cake. Or when Cinnamon Bun misunderstood the word democracy and tried to hold a kingdom-wide dance-off to elect a leader. Or the quiet afternoons PB spent observing her earliest creations as they learned to play, argue, forgive. It was a strange form of motherhood, one that required not lullabies but safety protocols, not kisses goodnight, but perimeter defenses. Still, she cared, deeply, sometimes too deeply. She wept, alone and unseen, When her earliest experiment, a candy dog named Gumdrop, melted in the sun one summer, she mourned the creatures who didn't stabilize, who cracked apart mid-sentence, their personalities never fully forming. They weren't just failures of science, they were losses. And losses stay with her. Even now, if you look closely at her face in moments of stillness, you might see it. The gentle ache beneath the surface. The burden of memory, of time, of creation. One of the most curious parts of PB's early years is how little she tried to explore the world beyond her kingdom. For someone so curious, she remained rooted, anchored to the candy kingdom like a plant to soil. Was it fear or responsibility? Or maybe something deeper? Maybe she believed the outside world had already failed. And if she were to survive, to truly thrive, she had to build something entirely new. Something insulated, something pure. But the truth is, the world kept creeping in. Other kingdoms rose. The Flame Kingdom, the Slime Kingdom, the Ice Kingdom with its lonesome monarch, and with them came politics, conflict, and power games. Princess Bubblegum had to learn diplomacy quickly. She sharpened her tongue, cloaked her intelligence behind politeness, and played a long game. Not out of pride, but out of protection, because every threat to her kingdom felt personal. This wasn't just a land she ruled. It was her life's work, her legacy, her children, and she would defend them with everything she had. Sometimes that meant making hard choices, aligning with forces she didn't trust, creating weapons she hoped she'd never have to use, spying, manipulating, replacing faulty citizens with near-identical versions when the originals became unstable. She told herself it was all for the greater good, and maybe it was. But the truth, whispered in the dead of night when her lab is quiet and the stars press against the glass, is this. Princess Bubblegum is scared. Scared of losing control. Scared of unraveling. Scared that she isn't truly real. That without the Candy Kingdom to define her, she would simply dissolve. And so she builds, she perfects, she protects. Not just them, but herself. Still, every once in a while, when she's not looking, a candy citizen will catch her staring out across the kingdom with a faraway look in her eyes, as if she's listening for something. Maybe it's the memory of the mother gum calling her back. Or maybe it's just the sound of everything she's built breathing, shifting, living beneath her steady hands. Either way, she never turns away for long. There's always more work to do. The Candy Kingdom had become more than a refuge. It was a mirror of Princess Bubblegum's own psyche. Bright, sweet, orderly. And beneath it all, profoundly fragile. And maybe that's the secret no one speaks aloud. That the kingdom is beautiful, not in spite of its flaws, but because of them. Because within the swirl of calculated perfection lies something real. A kind of accidental humanity. A flicker of spirit stitched into every sugar molecule. The candy people might be silly, scattered, even unstable, but they care. They love. They laugh. They live. And in the quietest chambers of her heart, PB cherishes that. Not because she made them that way, but because they became that way. Somehow, against all odds, life bloomed in her test tubes and transcended her intentions. And that's a strange thing for a creator to admit, that her creations became more than she planned. But maybe that's the truest measure of life. Still, there's a tension that runs through her like a live wire, a constant balancing act between genius and governance, between cold science and deep feeling. And as she grew older, if that word even means anything for someone like her, she grew more guarded. more careful with her affections, more precise in her diplomacy. Some might say she became colder. But that's not quite right. She simply began to wear her warmth like armor, hidden, but still there if you knew how to look. Sometimes it would slip through, in the way she touched a worn-out candy person's shoulder, or in the quiet sigh she let out when Marceline's name came up, or in the long hours she'd spend restoring a crumbling gumdrop statue in the plaza when no one was watching. She remembered everything. That was the blessing and curse of her mind. The early failures, the lonely years, the scent of ozone after rain on the broken earth, the laughter of early friends who no longer existed, the time before the kingdom when she was just Bonnie Bell, floating through the rubble of the old world, trying to make sense of a future she hadn't asked for. That past never left her. And maybe that's why she worked so hard to control the future. Because if you've ever been truly alone, truly frightened of disappearing, you might do anything to make sure it never happens again. Even if that means becoming something more machine than monarch. Even if it means playing God with gum and glucose. Even if it means carrying the weight of 1,000 lives day after day without ever once asking for rest. Princess Bubblegum never chose to be born. But every day since, she's chosen to endure, to create, to protect. And maybe that's what makes her more than a ruler, more than a scientist, more than a cluster of pink polymers held together by willpower and curiosity. Maybe what makes her real, truly real, isn't the kingdom she built or the science she mastered. Maybe it's the simple fact that she cares, that she wakes up each day with the full knowledge of how delicate her world is and chooses to fight for it anyway. So next time you see her standing tall in her candy pink tower, clipboard in hand and eyes full of calculation, remember this: she was born from goo. But she became something else, something rare, something enduring, a bubble risen from the dark that never burst. In the heart of the Candy Kingdom, beneath the glossy towers and sugary gardens, there exists a quiet hum, a low, persistent pulse, steady as a heartbeat, deep in the laboratory chambers where Princess Bubblegum spends most of her time. To the untrained eye, it's just a lab. But to her, it's a sanctuary, a place where chaos can be controlled, where answers can be found in equations, and where emotions, messy, unpredictable emotions, can be set aside for a little while. It's here, in this clinical quiet, that science becomes her compass, her comfort, her shield. Because when things get too complicated, PB doesn't cry. She calculates, she models, she tests, and this has always been her way. Even when she was younger, still discovering the extent of her intelligence, she would turn inward in times of stress, not toward others, but toward logic, toward the clean, quiet clarity of the scientific method. A problem arises, break it down. A friend is hurting, synthesize a solution. A threat appears on the horizon, build a defense system before breakfast. It's not that she doesn't feel things. On the contrary, Princess Bubblegum feels deeply. But she learned early on that emotions are unstable variables. They change, they mislead, they overwhelm. Science, though? Science is stable. Science makes sense. And so, over time, she began to favor science not just as a tool, but as a language, as a way of being. Every relationship, every moment of joy or grief or confusion would filter through the lens of data and deduction. She didn't mean to become distant. She just needed things to make sense. But the trouble with logic is that it can't always hold the weight of a heart. Take Lemongrab, for instance. A being of her own creation, crafted with care, intelligence, and purpose, yet flawed, painfully so. His mind unstable, his loneliness unbearable. And when his suffering grew louder, when he began to unravel, she tried to fix him. She offered solutions, tweaks, adjustments, clones. But what he really needed was something she didn't know how to offer back then. Empathy, connection, an emotional response, not a scientific one. And that's the quiet tragedy of PB's choices. So often, her instinct is to solve rather than feel. She builds walls out of formulas, shields made of circuitry. And sometimes, people get left outside those walls. People like Finn. The brave, big-hearted boy who looked up to her with pure admiration, who trusted her without question. And yet when he reached out to her to be close, to understand, she met his warmth with restraint. Not because she didn't care, but because she did, and didn't know what to do with it. Because caring for someone like PB is dangerous. It introduces risk. It complicates plans. It clouds the pristine waters of her mind. And yet, it lingers, like static on a silent channel, like a heartbeat under glass. There were times, rare quiet times, when she allowed herself to feel more openly. When Marceline sang and PB stood nearby, pretending not to listen, but hanging on every word. When she offered Finn a soft smile, brief and uncertain, before retreating behind her royal duties. It's not that she doesn't want to feel. It's that she's scared of what happens when she does. Because emotion doesn't follow laws. Emotion breaks things. And PB has spent a lifetime building things she can't afford to lose. So she chooses the lab, the cold glow of her screens. The silence of a room where beakers clink and data flows and no one expects her to open up or break down. In that space, she is in control. And maybe that's the one thing she's never been able to fully surrender. Still, no matter how much Princess Bubblegum surrounds herself with formulas and force fields, life has a way of slipping through the cracks. Emotions, after all, aren't switches to flip or equations to balance. They arrive like weather, unannounced, overwhelming, sometimes soft and sometimes destructive. And for someone who's spent centuries trying to keep things tidy, that's deeply unsettling. Her relationships are the clearest windows into this inner tension. With Finn, we saw a kind of protective distance. She cared for him, certainly. She admired his bravery, respected his loyalty, but she also kept him at arm's length, not just because of the age gap or their differing roles in the kingdom, but because closeness, real closeness, means vulnerability. And vulnerability? That's the one thing she can't synthesize in a lab. Then there's Marceline. Oh, Marceline. A bond layered with history, heartbreak, and something unspoken that lingers in the pauses between words. They share a past neither of them fully talks about, and yet it spills through in sideways glances and unfinished sentences, in old songs, in the way PB holds herself a little differently when Marceline is near, less rigid, less guarded, and maybe for a moment, a little more human. But even then, she defaults to her safe zone, to rationality. She'll build Marceline a sound system, repair a broken bass amp, catalog her musical frequencies in a database, but she won't say how she really feels, not without layers of meaning, not without codes and walls and plausible deniability. Because for PB, love isn't a simple declaration. It's a variable too unstable to plug into the world she's built, and yet it pulls at her. She's torn, always, between her role as ruler and her desire to just be, between duty and emotion, between creation and connection. And sometimes, this internal push and pull leaks out into her choices as a leader. Take how she governs the Candy Kingdom, with meticulous attention to every detail. Her citizens are monitored, repaired, even replaced if necessary, not out of cruelty, but out of an overwhelming fear that letting things run wild will lead to collapse. She sees emotion as a threat to order, because she's seen what happens when feelings go unchecked. Lemongrab's despair, the chaos of magic, the unpredictability of Marceline's moods, even her own rare moments of unfiltered expression. They all carry consequences. Consequences she's not willing to let unfold freely. So she designs systems, checks and balances, psychological patches. And still something slips through. Because the Candy Kingdom isn't just a machine, it's alive. And living things don't always behave. There are moments when her attempts to control things backfire, when citizens feel stifled, when allies pull away, when she looks out over the kingdom and wonders, not for the first time, if she's protected everyone or imprisoned them. But she keeps going, because for PB, science isn't just a method. It's a shield, a mask, a kind of armor she wears so she doesn't fall apart. And beneath that armor is a heart that's not frozen, but tired. Tired of making the hard choices, of carrying the weight alone, of pretending that logic can fix everything. She knows it can't. She knows, in those quiet moments when she rests her head on a cluttered workbench, that even the most elegant solution won't mend a broken friendship, or quiet a restless soul. But what else does she have? She doesn't trust feelings. They're too messy, too loud, too raw. And so she returns to her lab, again and again, because that's where she feels safest, even if it means feeling alone. But even in her fortress of logic, there are cracks, hairline fractures where emotion seeps in despite her best efforts. And one of those cracks is BMO. A tiny robot full of childlike wonder and imagination, BMO operates almost entirely on feeling. BMO dreams, plays, laughs. They invent little dramas, act out stories, and live with a kind of innocence that PB could never allow herself to access. Yet she keeps BMO close, not in the way she maintains a security system or upgrades a weapon. No, with BMO, she watches, quietly, with a flicker of curiosity and perhaps even envy. Because BMO isn't afraid to feel. BMO is chaos, BMO is emotion. And PB, despite herself, sees something freeing in that. It's a theme that echoes again and again in her life. The people closest to her are often the ones least interested in structure. Marceline, wild and emotional. BMO, spontaneous and childlike. Even Finn, with his big heart and heroic instinct to throw logic to the wind for what feels right. They all represent something she's distanced herself from, the raw mess of being. And maybe in surrounding herself with these people, she's reaching for something she can't name, some forgotten part of herself that existed before the equations and governance, before the weight of leadership turned her emotions into threats. Because long ago, before the title of princess, before the kingdom, she was just Bonnibel, a curious spark in a pink goo, looking at the broken world and deciding to rebuild it. But she didn't rebuild it out of cold ambition. She did it out of love, a love for life, a love for order, yes, but also a love for her creations, for the silly, weird, fragile beings who stumble through the halls of her kingdom with lopsided grins and candy stick legs. She wanted them to thrive. She just didn't know how to let go enough to thrive alongside them. And this is the paradox she lives with. The more she tries to preserve what she loves, the more distant she becomes from it. It's why she micromanages, why she builds surveillance systems, why she rewrites citizens' personalities when they malfunction. Because to her, deviation is danger, spontaneity is risk, and risk, when you're responsible for thousands of lives, is unacceptable. But in trying to eliminate chaos, she also eliminates chance. Chance for growth, chance for deeper connection, chance for vulnerability. And deep down, I think she knows this. She's brilliant, after all, one of the most intelligent minds in all of OO. She sees the patterns. She understands the trade-offs. And that knowledge weighs on her in a way no one else quite sees. There are moments when she falters, when the walls tremble. Like the time she stepped down from the throne, not because she was overthrown, but because she realized painfully that maybe her people needed to choose her, not just follow her out of programming or design. That moment was not calculated. It was emotional, and it hurt. But it also opened something, a space, a possibility. And isn't that the essence of emotion? That terrifying openness, that gap between what we control and what we feel? For PB, that space is the final frontier. Not outer space, not subatomic matter, but the unpredictable, unquantifiable space of the human or candy heart. It's a realm she hasn't yet mastered. But maybe she's learning, slowly, cautiously, like dipping a toe into warm water after years of standing in the cold. Maybe science was never meant to replace emotion. Maybe it's just meant to stand beside it, not as a shield, but as a support, a way to understand rather than override. And maybe someday Princess Bubblegum will step more fully into that understanding. Maybe she'll let herself feel, not in secret, not behind a microscope, but openly, messily, beautifully. And maybe when she does, she'll discover a kind of peace even her most advanced algorithms couldn't predict. We often think of intelligence as something separate from feeling, as if the mind and heart are rivals, each fighting for dominance. But with Princess Bubblegum, the truth is more complex. Her brilliance is emotional. It comes from a place of deep care. Every invention, every calculated decision, every sleepless night in her lab, it all stems from love. A fierce, protective, overwhelming love for her kingdom, for the people she built, for the world she's tried tirelessly to keep from falling apart. She doesn't retreat into science because she lacks feeling. She retreats because she feels too much. And the only way she's ever learned to process that flood of emotion is to organize it, tame it, filter it through logic until it becomes something she can hold in her hands and fix. But there are some things you can't fix with formulas. A friendship on the verge of collapse. A heartbreak that's been festering for decades. A loneliness that even your own creations can't cure. PB carries all of that with her, quietly beneath her polished surface. She smiles, she solves, she rules. But sometimes, if you look closely, you'll catch a flicker of something behind her eyes. A softness, a weariness, a question she hasn't yet answered. And in those rare, unguarded moments, like when she listens to Marceline sing, or watches Finn walk away, or holds a broken piece of tech just a little too long, you can almost hear her wondering, what if there's more to life than keeping it from falling apart? What if being strong doesn't mean being perfect? What if feeling deeply isn't a liability, but a kind of strength all its own? These aren't questions she can plug into a calculator. They aren't problems with neat, satisfying solutions. But they are questions that move her in quiet ways. ways that show up in the gentle arc of her character over time. We see it in her reconciliation with Marceline, a relationship once fragmented by silence, now pieced back together with tentative laughter and late-night music. We see it when she allows the Candy Kingdom to elect her, an act of vulnerability, of trust, of giving up control. And we see it when she listens, truly listens to others. When she sets the science aside for just a moment and lets the emotion speak. Those moments are small, but they matter. They are the proof that even the most logic-bound heart can learn to open, slowly, imperfectly, beautifully. And maybe that's the quiet arc of Princess Bubblegum's story. Not just the rise of a ruler or the brilliance of a scientist, but the awakening of a soul who learns that being human, candy human or otherwise, isn't about perfection or control. It's about connection, about letting others in, about facing the chaos, not with shields, but with courage. The courage to feel, the courage to let go, the courage to be soft in a world that taught her to be hard. So, as we close this chapter of her tale, this careful dance between science and emotion, maybe we can all take a breath and reflect. Where in our own lives are we choosing control over connection? Where have we built labs around our hearts? And what might happen if we, like Princess Bubblegum, decided, just for a moment, to let ourselves feel? Not solve, not fix, just feel. Because sometimes the most brilliant thing we can do is simply let the heart lead. Beneath the sweet surface of the Candy Kingdom, under the frosting towers, the gumdrop streets, and the cheerful, ever-smiling faces, there's something deeper, something older, something quieter and forgotten. You wouldn't know it by looking. To the untrained eye, the Candy Kingdom is all bubblegum charm and marshmallow joy. A pastel utopia where even the guard dogs are made of licorice and everyone seems perfectly content. But that's only the surface, because beneath those candy-colored layers lies something that Princess Bubblegum rarely talks about. A secret world, buried halls, locked chambers, experiments sealed away in silence, machines still humming in the dark, forgotten rooms and forgotten beings. And when you walk through the deepest corridors of her castle, those rarely used, dimly lit ones lined with rusted panels and flickering lights, you start to feel it. The weight of time, the presence of something that doesn't smile, something that remembers. It starts, perhaps, with the Rattleballs. Do you remember him? A once loyal candy knight built by Bubblegum herself, engineered for precision, for control, for swift, unyielding justice. But he became too good at his job, too strong, too independent. So she shut him down, not with malice, but with a logic she couldn't ignore. He was a risk, a threat to the soft balance she maintained in her kingdom. So, like many things that got out of hand, he was quietly buried, his order disbanded, his existence swept under the gumdrop rug. But he wasn't gone. He just waited, in the shadows, alone, thinking, remembering. And when Finn eventually stumbled upon him, the truth came pouring out like syrup from a cracked bottle. Not just about Rattleballs, but about PB herself. About the measures she takes, the experiments she abandons, the lengths she's gone to in her centuries of rule to protect her kingdom, even from itself. And Rattleballs was just one. There are deeper chambers, stranger echoes. Think of the giant heart, Ricardio, constructed from PB's own DNA, her actual heart, somehow personified and twisted into a charming, villainous entity. His existence wasn't an accident. He was born out of PB's own manipulation of life, her unchecked exploration to the boundaries between organic and synthetic. A literal manifestation of her inner darkness, perhaps? Or maybe just a failed attempt at companionship gone wrong. Either way, Ricardio was hidden, dismissed, locked away. Because in Bubblegum's world, when something threatens the carefully arranged order, it must be removed, silenced, sealed. Even if that something is her own creation. And then we drift further down, below even the dungeons, to the place where the true secrets live, where the earliest experiments, those first fragile attempts at civilization, still hum. Forgotten projects, artificial life, half-born candy citizens who didn't pass the criteria for sweetness or sanity. What happened to them? Are they gone? Or are they still there, waiting in the dark? There's no clear answer. But every so often, something strange echoes from the depths. A creak, a rattle, a voice that shouldn't exist. And PB never explains. She simply tightens security, upgrades her scanners, adds another layer of frosting to the walls. As if hiding it better will make it disappear. As if memory can be programmed away. Even the land itself beneath the Candy Kingdom is not what it seems. You see, the foundation Princess Bubblegum built her kingdom upon wasn't empty. Long before the candy people danced in the streets or Bubblegum took the throne, this place was a site of quiet ruin, a scar left behind by the Mushroom War, a world once blazing with fire, now buried under layers of sweetness. And PB, ever the builder, the scientist, the queen, decided to reclaim it, to make it livable, to make it hers. But some things don't stay buried. Some memories don't like being paved over. Take the Vault of Bones, a place mentioned only in whispers, tucked beneath the oldest wing of the castle. No one truly knows what's in there, only that the door is always locked, the temperature always cold, and the guards never talk about it. And there's the reconditioning chamber, a sterile, humming room where misbehaving candy people are adjusted. Not punished, not reformed. Reprogram. It's subtle, clinical, quiet. And it's always done with a smile. Because in the Candy Kingdom, safety is paramount. And PB believes that with enough rewiring, any problem can be solved. Even if that problem has a name, a family, and a sticky little laugh. And this raises the question. How much of the Candy Kingdom's cheerfulness is truly authentic? How much of it is engineered? Do the citizens love Princess Bubblegum because of her leadership? Or because she made them that way? In a realm where emotions can be mapped, behaviors rewritten, and memories erased, what does free will even mean? The thought is unsettling. But then again, that's the thing about secrets. They're not always buried out of shame. Sometimes they're buried out of fear. Sometimes to protect others. And sometimes to protect ourselves from the truth. Because the truth is, Bubblegum isn't just afraid of failure. She's afraid of loss. Of watching what she's built crumble again, like it did in those early years. She remembers the time before the kingdom. The loneliness. The empty silence of her lab filled with half-finished projects and goose-slick floors. She remembers the candy people melting from design flaws, crying out in voices she hadn't quite perfected yet. She remembers every mistake, and she's haunted by them. So she hides them. She buries them beneath layers of progress and frosting and cheer. It's why she keeps records so obsessively. Why her files go back centuries. Why she has backup plans for backup plans for backup plans. Because if she can control the past, then maybe just maybe, she can control the future. But of course, nothing stays buried forever. Not anew. Not when the world is built on the ruins of another. And every so often, something slips through the cracks. A strange mutation. A familiar name on an old file. A voice in the pipes. And PB just tightened her grip. She becomes a little colder. A little more efficient. A little less human. Because vulnerability, for her, has never been an option. The kingdom must survive, at any cost. Even if that cost is the truth. Even if that cost is herself. But even secrets, no matter how deeply buried, leave trails. Sometimes they drift up through the candy cobblestone in the form of glitches, odd behavior from a citizen who suddenly forgets their name, or a hiccup in the kingdom's AI systems, quietly corrected by Bubblegum before anyone notices. Other times they're written in ink, faint, careful notes in PB's private journals, stored in locked drawers and coded in formulas only she understands. And then there are the ruins. Not candy ruins, but old rusted structures buried beneath the castle itself. Fragments of pre-war technology, forgotten bunkers, machines she didn't build but studied. Relics of the world that came before. The world she never talks about. Why does she keep them? Why hasn't she dismantled them? The answer, most likely, is knowledge. Because to Bubblegum, knowledge is survival. History isn't just a story, it's a blueprint, a warning, a pattern she must learn if she wants to avoid repeating the chaos of the past. And so she collects, studies, stores, in secret. Always in secret. Some say that hidden deep beneath the kingdom is a room filled with artifacts, strange devices, forbidden texts, even relics of magic, which Bubblegum outwardly disdains but quietly respects. She may not trust magic, but she understands its power. And when you're a ruler surrounded by chaos, you don't throw away power. You archive it. You contain it. Because one day, you might need it. Then there's the matter of lemon grab. An experiment gone wrong? Or something more? It was designed to rule, perhaps as a contingency plan. Perhaps as a twisted reflection of herself. Either way, PB created him, shaped him, gave him life. And then she abandoned him. Because he didn't fit. Because he was unstable. Because he represented a part of her science that spun out of control. But what's more haunting than Lemon Grab's existence is the fact that she didn't destroy him. She let him live. Even gave him his own kingdom. Was it guilt? Or curiosity? Was she hoping he'd evolve, or did she just want to see what would happen when one of her own creations was given full autonomy? And when Lemon Grab became cruel, unpredictable, and eventually monstrous, she didn't stop him. She managed him. Containment again. Always containment. The same approach she took with her darker projects. The biohazard creatures, the volatile candy hybrids, the unstable tech. Rather than destroy her mistakes, she watches them, learns from them. Because somewhere in the core of her being, Princess Bubblegum believes that even her failures have value, that even her most terrifying creations might someday be useful. It's a chilling mindset, but also profoundly lonely. Imagine carrying the weight of every secret. Imagine walking through your own kingdom and seeing ghosts of your past behind every smiling face. The lab assistant who melted. The guard dog that turned. The heart that betrayed you. Imagine having to smile back and knowing what you know. That's PB's reality. And perhaps that's why she rarely sleeps. Why she's always tinkering, always building, always perfecting. Because the second she stops, the silence creeps in. And in the silence, the past gets loud. And yet, there's beauty in the secrecy, too. Strange as it sounds, these hidden chambers and buried truths tell a story, not just of fear or control, but of love, a deep, overwhelming love for her kingdom, her people, her world. Even if that love is expressed through wires and formulas, locks and surveillance. Princess Bubblegum isn't just hiding secrets from her kingdom. She's sheltering them, sheltering everyone. Because in her mind, she's the wall standing between peace and chaos, between safety and the unknown. She knows the world is full of threats, magical, technological, emotional. And she's trying, desperately, to stay one step ahead. And if that means hiding a few truths, if that means storing forbidden tech in hidden vaults, or sealing rogue candy citizens in cryopods until she finds a solution, well, she'll do it. She has to. No one else can bear that responsibility. But of course, that burden takes its toll. There's a coldness to PB that even her closest friends can't quite breach. A subtle distance in her eyes when others talk about feelings or fear or pain. She listens, but always analytically, always calculating. And yet, she feels. You can see it in flashes. In the way her voice trembles when she thinks no one's watching. In the way she visits old lab rooms in the dead of night, brushing dust off old blueprints with a trembling hand. In the quiet moments she shares with Marceline, not saying much, but letting the silence speak for her. She isn't emotionless. She's guarded. And maybe that's what all these hidden chambers represent. Not just the physical secrets, but the emotional ones, too. The parts of herself she's locked away, compartmentalized, monitored. Because science, for Bubblegum, is more than just her profession. It's her armor. It protects her from the messiness of emotion, from the unpredictability of love, from the fear of losing everything again. But armor, no matter how strong, eventually cracks. Sometimes it's the little things that wear it down. A soft look from Marceline, a reckless act of heroism from Finn, a kind word from Peppermint Butler. These tiny human moments that remind her she's more than just a ruler, more than a scientist, more than the secrets she keeps. And maybe that's the ultimate irony. For all her attempts to bury the past, it's the present that keeps calling to her, tugging at her, whispering, "You don't have to do this alone." Or she rarely answers. But maybe one day she will. Maybe one day she'll walk into those forgotten chambers, not as a queen sealing away mistakes, but as a woman ready to face them, to open the doors, to let the light in. Because secrets can be heavy, but sharing them, that's how you heal. And that's the quiet, unspoken hope that lingers beneath the Candy Kingdom. A hum beneath the floors, a warmth behind the cold, that one day Princess Bubblegum might trust her people enough to let them see, to let them know, not just the ruler, not just the genius, but the girl who started it all. In a ruined world, with nothing but a lab coat and a dream. The girl who built a kingdom of sugar to shield herself from sorrow. And maybe, just maybe, the girl who's ready to feel again. There's something curious about the way Princess Bubblegum loves. It's not loud, not dramatic. It doesn't crash like a wave or burn like a fire. It's quieter than that. More like the steady hum of a machine left on overnight, working tirelessly in the background. Almost invisible, but always there. And like most things with her, love is complicated. Because for someone so brilliant, so powerful, so in control, relationships don't come easy. Not for a queen with 1,000 responsibilities and a mind that never stops ticking. Not for a girl who's been hurt before. PB doesn't fall the way others do. She calibrates. She measures. She hesitates. And yet, she feels. We've seen it in her smallest gestures. A flicker of softness in her eyes when Finn says something brave. A pause in her voice when she speaks Marceline's name. A delicate tension when she reaches out, then pulls away, almost touching, but not quite. Because connection, for her, is dangerous, it means exposure. It means losing control. And control is everything to Princess Bubblegum. But still, she tries. One of the most tender and most tragic relationships in her life is with Marceline the Vampire Queen. Two people who couldn't be more different, one born from science, the other from shadow and sorrow. And yet, there's a familiarity there, a closeness that seems to go back further than either of them are ready to admit. Their conversations are laced with half-truths and long silences, the kind that only happen between people who have shared something deep and never quite resolved it. Marceline brings out something raw in PB. She teases her, challenges her, sees through the polished queen to the lonely girl underneath. And that's terrifying, because Marceline remembers Bubblegum before the crown, before the lab coats and responsibilities. Back when she was just Bonnibel, a strange, brilliant kid trying to make sense of a broken world. It's easier to keep her distance. Easier to bury herself in equations and strategy and duty. But every time Marceline walks away, every time they argue, you can see it. The ache, the regret, the longing. PB wants to let people in. She just doesn't know how. And this struggle isn't limited to Marceline. It's there with Finn, too. Finn, so earnest, so open-hearted, looked up to her from the very beginning. He adored her in that pure teenage way, hoping for love in return. And for a moment she tried. Kissed him. Played along. But it didn't fit. Not because she didn't care, but because she knew better. She knew what it meant to let someone that young and full of hope fall for her. She knew how deeply it could hurt. She chose to end it, to protect them both. And yet, she still lets Finn in. As an advisor, a friend, a reminder of the world outside her mind. Sometimes he pulls her out of her calculations just long enough to feel again. Then there's Peppermint Butler, her servant, her confidant, her accomplice in the darker corners of the kingdom. Their relationship is built on shared secrets, on mutual understanding, on trust so deep it borders on eerie. He knows things. He's seen things. And yet, he stays by her side. Because even he sees the weight she carries. The quiet, relentless burden of leadership. Of always having to be right. Of never having the luxury to fall apart. But even with Peppermint Butler, someone who knows her better than most, there's still a kind of emotional distance, a line she rarely crosses. Because vulnerability to Princess Bubblegum isn't just scary, it's inefficient, risky, a threat to the delicate balance she's built. And yet, isolation comes at a cost. You can see it in the rare moments when she lets her guard down, when her voice breaks, when she falters. Moments when the weight of centuries seems to settle on her shoulders all at once. Because the truth is, she's not invincible. She gets tired, she gets scared, she second-guesses. She's just gotten really, really good at hiding it. Behind every decision, every decree, every experiment gone wrong, there's a flicker of doubt she doesn't let anyone see. Did I do the right thing? Did I go too far? Did I push them away? Again? Her mind is her greatest weapon, but it's also her greatest cage. And that's where the real struggle lies, Not in the monsters she faces, or the political threats, or the candy-based emergencies, but in the conflict between her head and her heart. Her head tells her to lead with logic, to weigh every variable, to stay one step ahead, to never show weakness. But her heart? It aches. It wants softness. It wants connection. It wants to be held, to be known, to be understood, not just as a ruler or a genius or a protector, but as Bonnible, as a person. And for all her brilliance, all her foresight, she still doesn't quite know how to balance those two parts of herself. Sometimes she leans too far into logic, and people get hurt. Other times, she lets emotion in, and chaos follows. Like when she rebuilt the Earl of Lemongrab, not once but twice, knowing full well he was unstable, but hoping somehow he might change. Or when she cloned herself after being overthrown, desperate to return, to fix what was broken, only to be haunted by her doppelganger's independent will. These weren't just science experiments. They were emotional reactions disguised as rational plans, because sometimes Princess Bubblegum doesn't even realize she's struggling until the damage is already done. She calls it strategy, but really it's fear. Fear of letting go. Fear of making the wrong choice. Fear of being alone. And that fear bleeds into every relationship she has. She holds people at arm's length, not because she doesn't care, but because she cares too much. Because once you let someone in, they can leave. They can hurt you. They can change things. And change, real, emotional change, is something she's never quite learned to trust. So she stays in control, or tries to. She calculates her interactions. She avoids messy conversations. She builds walls that look like policies and protocols and scientific boundaries. But sometimes, someone slips through, like Marceline, who doesn't care about the rules or the image or the systems, who just wants her, as she is, flawed, guarded, real. And in those moments, rare, flickering moments, Princess Bubblegum lets go just a little. We see it when she plays music with Marceline, when they stand side by side, not as queen and vampire, but as two souls reaching for each other. There's no formula for that. No equation. Just feeling. And for PB, feeling is the most dangerous thing of all. Because feelings are messy, unpredictable, illogical. But also, they're human. And no matter how much she pretends otherwise, no matter how perfectly she calibrates her public image, or how tightly she controls her world, Princess Bubblegum is human. Candy-based biology aside, she longs and grieves and hopes just like anyone else. She just hasn't figured out how to let herself show it. Not completely. Not yet. And maybe that's what makes Princess Bubblegum so compelling, so achingly real. She's not some untouchable monarch or flawless genius. She's someone who's trying, really, truly trying, to do what's right, even when it hurts, even when it isolates her, even when she's not sure if she deserves forgiveness. Take her dynamic with the citizens of the Candy Kingdom. On the surface, it's idyllic. Smiling faces, sugary laughter, peace in the streets. But underneath, there's tension. She's not just their ruler, she's their creator. Their mother, in a strange way. Most of the candy people were designed by her, molded in a lab given life through her scientific will. It's an incredible power, but also a profound responsibility. And sometimes, a source of guilt. Because what does it mean to love someone you built? Can they truly love you back? Or are they just programmed to obey? These questions gnaw at her quietly. She rarely speaks them aloud, but they're there in the way she watches her people when they're not looking, in the way she hesitates before issuing orders, in the way she sometimes isolates herself, choosing not to get too close to the very being she brought into existence. There's an unspoken fear in her. What if I hurt them without meaning to? What if I already have? She's made mistakes. She's ruled with too heavy a hand. She's made decisions for the greater good that ended up causing pain. She's wrestled with ideas like autonomy, ethics, free will, all while smiling sweetly and waving to a kingdom that trusts her implicitly. And that trust, that's the heaviest weight of all. Because even when they forgive her, even when they cheer for her, even when they sing songs in her honor, she remembers her missteps. The times she went too far. The times she chose logic over compassion. The times she silenced others to protect her vision of peace. And so the cycle continues. She distances herself. Not because she thinks she's better, but because deep down, she's afraid she's worse. Too dangerous. Too flawed. Too unsure. This same pattern shows up in her relationship with Flame Princess. Early on, when Flame Princess began exploring her power and independence, Peebee stepped in, not as a mentor, but as a monitor, a silent observer, a calculating presence. She warned Finn that Flame Princess was unstable, a threat, not out of malice, but out of fear. She saw the volatility of fire and assumed it had to be extinguished or contained. But in doing so, she nearly snuffed out someone else's path, someone else's growth. Later, she realized her mistake. Peebee may be brilliant, but emotional intelligence isn't something she can just download into her brain. It's something she has to learn, slowly, painfully, over time. And that's what makes her growth feel so meaningful. Because it's earned, not gifted, not programmed, not perfect, but human. There's something deeply relatable in that struggle, in the way she tries to fix herself with research and plans, when what she really needs is connection. She knows how to rebuild a candy golem from scratch, how to isolate a rogue particle, how to track interdimensional frequencies. But how to forgive herself, how to apologize and mean it, how to open up, not as Princess Bubblegum, but as Bonnie Belle. That's the real science she hasn't cracked yet. And maybe she never fully will. Maybe that's the point. That no matter how smart you are, love and pain and healing aren't things you master. They're things you live through, things you feel your way through. And for all the people in her life, Marceline, Finn, Peppermint Butler, Flame Princess, even her candy citizens, what they really want isn't perfection. They want her. Honest, present, vulnerable. But for someone who's lived with the burden of ruling, of creating, of holding it all together for so long, that kind of vulnerability feels almost impossible. Still, she tries, in tiny ways. A glance held a second longer, a rare apology, a small laugh shared without calculation, a memory revisited, not to analyze it, but to feel it. Those are the quiet moments where we see the real Peebee, beneath the crown, the formulas, the fear. Not just a ruler, not just a genius, but a girl who's still learning how to love and be loved. And that's more powerful than any invention. There's a quiet kind of bravery in the way Princess Bubblegum evolves. It's not the kind that comes with fanfare or battle cries, but the kind that happens in solitude, in silence, in those long, restless hours where no one's watching and everything feels just a little too heavy. Bravery that whispers, try again. Because despite all her walls, all her worries, all the ways she pushes people away to protect herself and them, she still shows up. For her kingdom, for her friends, for herself. She keeps trying. She lets Marceline back in. Not all at once, not without friction, but with small acts of courage, like singing with her again, talking about the past, owning her part in their pain. It's one of the most human things we see from her. Not just rekindling a connection, but facing the discomfort of it, the vulnerability, the need. And as they slowly find their way back to each other, something beautiful happens. PB doesn't have to be perfect. She doesn't have to control everything. She doesn't even have to have all the answers. She just has to be present. With Marceline, with her people, with herself. In one of the most touching moments from the later seasons, we see them fight side by side, not because it's a political move or a calculated strategy, but because they trust each other. Because they've seen each other at their worst and stayed. And in that staying, there's healing. Not a sudden magical fix, but the slow, patient mending of something real. PB's relationships at their core are reflections of her internal battle. They challenge her in ways that no lab experiment or diplomatic dilemma ever could. They force her to confront what science can't solve, the ache of guilt, the terror of closeness, the sweetness of being truly known. And that's why so many of her strongest emotional arcs are quiet, not showy, not dramatic, but full of breath and pause and tentative hope. Because deep down, she's not looking to be idolized. She's just trying to be understood. She wants someone to look past the perfect facade and say, it's okay to be unsure. You don't have to have it all figured out. And slowly through these connections, Marceline, Finn, even Lemongrab in his own bizarre way, she begins to believe it. That she's not just a ruler or a protector or a living brain in a pink dress. She's bonable, a work in progress, capable of mistakes, but also capable of change. And maybe that's the most powerful arc of all. Because while kingdoms rise and fall, and science pushes forward, and threats come and go, it's the quiet growth of one heart learning to open that stays with us. It's the girl beneath the crown, learning how to love, how to trust, how to let others in without losing herself. It's the realization that strength isn't always about control. Sometimes it's about surrender, letting the people you care about see you. Not just the version you built for them, but the real you. The scared, hopeful, tired, brilliant, aching, soft version that you've been hiding even from yourself. And for Princess Bubblegum, that journey isn't over. It never will be. Because love and leadership and identity aren't things you arrive at. They're things you continue becoming. And if there's one thing we've learned from watching her, it's that even the smartest person in the world can still grow, still soften, still be surprised by her own capacity for change. So as the night settles in and you drift deeper into that dreamlike place where thoughts blur into stars, remember this. Even a ruler made of candy can carry a heavy heart. Even a genius can struggle to understand her own feelings. And even someone who seems to have it all together is still learning, still hurting, still hoping, just like the rest of us. So breathe easy, dear listener. You're not alone in your contradictions, and neither is she. While the Candy Kingdom may seem like a whimsical wonderland, sugar-coated houses, dancing pastries, and candy citizens singing in the streets, beneath that frosting lies something far more intricate. A kingdom not just of sugar and smiles, but of politics, control, and quietly ticking systems of power. And at the center of it all, Princess Bubblegum, the kingdom's sovereign, scientist, and silent architect of a complex political structure that few ever question. Because why would they? The Candy people are loyal, adoring even. To them, PB isn't just a leader, she's practically divine. She made them, shaped them, protected them. But with that devotion comes a delicate truth. In the Candy Kingdom, love and loyalty are often engineered. Literally. Most of its citizens were created in PB's lab, their personalities molded to be cheerful, compliant, and sweet. Sometimes too sweet. Their minds often simplistic, their emotional range curated. Their independence? Well, that's where things get complicated. PB's rule isn't just political, it's biological. And that's where the quiet tension begins to simmer. Because if your citizens are your creations, can they ever truly challenge you? Should they? Would they even know how? The Candy Kingdom operates more like a benevolent technocracy than a traditional monarchy. PB makes decisions, enforces laws, and directs the future of her people without any formal parliament, council, or check on her authority. And for the longest time, no one questions it. Not the citizens, not the allies, not even PB herself. But power, no matter how sweetly it's wrapped, always casts a shadow. Let's pause for a moment and picture the kingdom again. Candy corn guards patrol the walls. Sentient desserts work in bakeries. Gumball machines nod happily in the marketplace. It feels like utopia. But the truth is, the Candy Kingdom is less a democracy and more a scientific experiment in governance. PB controls infrastructure, surveillance, education, even emergency procedures. She knows the chemical makeup of every citizen. She can shut down rogue elements with the press of a button. She can rebuild lives from genetic material. And that's not metaphor. That's canon. Now, let's take a breath. This isn't to say Princess Bubblegum is malicious, quite the opposite. She works tirelessly for the well-being of her people. She gives up sleep, comfort, and companionship to make sure her kingdom thrives. She genuinely believes in peace and prosperity. But the methods she uses, they blur lines. She has secretly monitored conversations, revived extinct life forms, and cloned individuals without consent. She's overthrown other rulers, infiltrated rival governments, and used technology to manipulate outcomes, all while smiling sweetly and insisting it's for the good of the kingdom. And maybe it is. But the truth of politics is rarely that clean. There are episodes that hint at political instability bubbling beneath the kingdom's candy coating, citizens questioning her decisions, protests, albeit tiny ones, where voices begin to rise. In one memorable arc, PB is briefly overthrown in an election she never saw coming, because she underestimated her people's desire for self-governance. The fact that it happens at all is profound, because for the first time, the citizens act not as programmed dependents, but as political beings. They say, "We trust you," but we also want to say, and it rattles her. PB isn't used to giving up control. She's used to fixing problems with facts and formulas, not trust and negotiation. But that shift, it's necessary. It forces her to reconsider the kind of leader she wants to be. A ruler of minds she shaped, or a representative of citizens with free will. That's the core of Candy Kingdom politics. The tension between safety and autonomy, between stability and freedom, between the synthetic sweetness of total order and the unpredictable messiness of true democracy. PB walks this line every day, often alone. She fears chaos, not because she's a tyrant, but because she's seen what happens when order crumbles. She's lived through the Mushroom War's long shadow. She's built her kingdom atop the ruins of a world that forgot how to care for itself. So her instinct is to protect, at any cost. But protection becomes control, and control becomes isolation. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the kingdom becomes a reflection not of its people, but of one woman's will. When Princess Bubblegum was briefly unseated by the King of Ooh, a slick, manipulative figure with charisma but no competence, it was one of the rare times her power truly slipped through her fingers. And it stung. Not just because she lost control, but because she realized how little she truly understood her people. For all her knowledge of their chemical structures, she hadn't fully grasped the emotional and political undercurrents forming beneath her orderly surface. The King of Oo's rise was a joke on paper, a bumbling fraud in a fur coat, but his popularity wasn't. It meant something. It meant the candy people, in their own innocent, easily swayed way, were hungry for something more than silent gratitude and passive protection. They wanted choice, voice, maybe even something resembling a future they shaped themselves. And that was terrifying for PB. Because autonomy means unpredictability. And unpredictability? It's the one thing science can't prepare you for. So when she's forced to go underground, displaced from her throne, PB doesn't just feel political defeat. She feels personal disorientation. Who is she without the seat of power, without the lab, without her schedule of tasks to keep everything from falling apart? She has to reckon with the unspoken truth of her governance. And then maybe, just maybe, she hasn't been leading so much as containing. The King of Oo's reign, though short-lived, throws into sharp relief the contrast between rule by illusion and rule by intellect. His kingdom becomes a playground for propaganda, vanity projects, and exploitation. And even though the Candy citizens welcome PB back with open arms after the chaos, something has shifted. This time, she's not just ruling because she can. She's ruling because she's been chosen again. And that matters. It matters because it begins a slow shift in how she views power, not just as a scientific duty, but as a social contract. One where trust must be earned, not programmed. Where stability is co-created, not enforced. But even then, she doesn't fully shed her old patterns. There are moments when PB reverts. When things get scary, she clamps down. When danger arises, she goes into fix-it mode, isolated in the lab, hands in beakers, mind racing with solutions that remove risk instead of inviting collaboration. It's her instinct. It's also her flaw. Because despite her brilliance, PB is often lonely in leadership. There's no counsel to lean on, no advisors with real authority. Even Peppermint Butler, loyal and clever as he is, often functions more like a shadowy executor than a democratic partner. And her citizens? Most are too innocent to understand the stakes. Or perhaps they're kept that way. Think of Starchy, who's genuinely terrified of things like ghosts and curses. Or Cinnamon Bun, whose intellect is childlike at best. Or the countless candy people who panic at the tiniest threat, lacking critical thinking, emotional resilience, or even survival skills. That's not an accident. That's design. PB's scientific shaping of her citizens, while sweet in intent, has left them dependent, docile, and easily swayed. She didn't just create a kingdom. She created subjects. And while she loves them dearly, so much it hurts, she's also made them fragile. She's given them a life of safety, yes, but at the cost of agency, at the cost of complexity, and sometimes at the cost of truth. We see glimpses of this when PB withholds information from her people for their own good, when she sugarcoats realities, when she runs experiments in secret. It's not always malicious, but it's almost always unilateral. The decisions are hers and hers alone, which raises an uncomfortable question. What happens when the benevolent ruler is no longer benevolent? The Candy Kingdom runs smoothly because PB is smart, compassionate, and hyper-responsible. But what if someone else had that level of unchecked control? What if the King of O had access to the same systems? Or if Lemongrab seized power again? What if PB herself, in a moment of fear, took things too far? There are no safeguards, no balance of power, just trust. And trust, however sweet, is fragile. That's the tension at the heart of the Candy Kingdom's political identity. It's not just about gumdrops and gummy bears. It's about centralization versus decentralization, autocracy versus shared power. It's about whether you can truly love a people you've engineered to never question you. PB tries. You can see her trying, slowly involving others more, listening more, softening just a little when people express doubt. But there's always a pause, a hesitation, because politics, to her, is deeply personal. It's survival. She governs not just to rule, but to protect the kingdom from what lies beyond its colorful borders. Mutants, warlords, magic gone wrong, echoes of the apocalypse. But in her drive to shield everyone, she builds walls, systems, protocols. A kingdom more advanced than any other, but also more dependent, more fragile, more centralized around her. The throne isn't just a seat. It's a fulcrum. Without PB, the Candy Kingdom teeters, and she knows it. Which might be why she never truly rests, why she micromanages, why she's so deeply afraid of showing weakness or stepping away. Because the kingdom isn't just her responsibility. In some ways, it's her burden. The idea of burden is subtle in Bubblegum's arc, but it threads through nearly every political decision she makes. She doesn't sit on a throne like royalty basking in privilege. She leans over blueprints at midnight, hunched in her lab, voice hoarse from a day full of counsel with herself. She is the system. And that's a dangerous place for any leader to be. No delegation, no successors, no infrastructure that can function without her direct touch. The Candy Kingdom is a centralized machine, and every gear, every dial, every pressure point is calibrated by Bubblegum alone. It's efficient. It's stable. But it's also brittle. And this brittleness becomes visible during times of absence, when PB is kidnapped, weakened, or otherwise removed. The kingdom quickly destabilizes. Without her, the candy people flail. Panic sets in. And more than once, her enemies see this dependency as a key vulnerability. So, if the Candy Kingdom is vulnerable without her, and if she knows this, why doesn't she build more robust, democratic systems? Why doesn't she train leaders, delegate power, establish checks and balances? Because letting go would mean losing certainty. And Princess Bubblegum craves certainty the way others crave comfort. It's not selfishness, it's trauma. Her memories stretch back hundreds of years. She remembers the aftermath of the Mushroom War, the chaos, the loneliness. Her earliest days were spent salvaging order from ruin, building structure from rubble, and bringing life to silence. She wasn't born into power. She engineered it to prevent collapse. And once you've lived through collapse, it's hard to trust anyone but yourself. Still, cracks begin to show. Not just in the political systems, but in PB herself. Over time, she becomes tired, quieter. Her smile, once perky and polished, softens into something more reflective. Her eyes don't dart as much. She pauses more before making choices. Because the weight of governance, the real, quiet, unrelenting kind, wears her down. She starts to realize that control, no matter how well-intentioned, cannot coexist with growth. That by making her citizens too dependent on her protection, she has denied them the chance to become more. We see moments where she experiments with letting go. She allows Finn and Jake to handle diplomatic missions. She trusts Peppermint Butler to keep the kingdom safe. She even begins to entertain the idea of Candy citizens having agency, taking roles that require judgment, creativity, even leadership. These are small changes, but for her, they are monumental. Still, the road isn't smooth. There are regressions. Take her creation of Goliad, an artificial heir designed to lead in her absence. She creates Goliad with every intention of raising a wise, fair leader. But she programs too much control into Goliad's core, too much certainty, too much bubblegum. The result is terrifying. Goliad doesn't want to rule by wisdom. She wants to control everything. Thoughts, actions, outcomes. She sees freedom as a flaw. The very thing PB feared in herself becomes amplified in Goliad. It's a chilling realization. And it underscores something deeply human in PB. She doesn't fear failure as much as she fears unpredictability. Goliad is a reflection of that fear made manifest. But then she creates Stormo, a counterbalance, born not from strict programming but from self-sacrifice. Stormo doesn't seek power. He exists simply to oppose tyranny. And maybe that's Bubblegum's truest political evolution, not in building smarter systems, but in learning to trust others to balance her, not to control, not to perfect, but to counterweight. That's the beginning of something new. And yet, politics in the Candy Kingdom remain personal, delicate, and often silent. There are no grand speeches, no ballots. The politics here are whispered between licks of lollipops, written in chemical formulas, embedded in how a ruler treats her creations. It's the politics of safety, of legacy, of one woman who has seen too much and now cannot rest. And underneath it all, the citizens sing and dance, unaware of the tightrope their ruler walks. Or maybe they do know, and they trust her anyway. Which brings us to one of the most bittersweet truths of the Candy Kingdom. Its people may not be equipped to lead a democracy, but they love their princess with unflinching sincerity, and that love, in its own gentle way, is political. They choose her, again and again, not because they have to, but because, even in her flaws, she chooses them too. There's something quietly tragic about a leader who never wanted to rule, only to find herself the cornerstone of a civilization. Princess Bubblegum never ran for office. She was never crowned in a grand ceremony, nor did she inherit the throne from a long line of rulers. No, her reign was the result of design, of protection, of necessity. She became a monarch because no one else could or would. And so politics in the Candy Kingdom became less about structure and more about survival, less about ideals and more about who will make sure we're safe when the sun doesn't rise right, when weird magic warps the walls, when monsters knock on the gates. The answer was always her. And she bore that weight quietly, fiercely, without rest. But the more she controlled, the more she realized that politics isn't just about decisions, it's about people. It's about listening, adapting, letting others speak, even when you know the answer already. It's about trust, not the fragile, easy kind, but the hard-won, painful kind that comes from letting go. It's about giving your people the chance to fall and learn how to stand up on their own. There's a key moment that captures this perfectly. When PB finally starts to step back from some of her more extreme habits, we see it in how she interacts with Marceline, with Finn, even with Lemongrab. His softness, hesitation, a willingness to hear things that don't match her worldview. And that shift, that's political evolution. Not with banners and elections, but with vulnerability. It takes more courage for Bubblegum to let someone else make a decision than it does for her to fight a war. Because war, she understands. But trust, that's the unknown. Still, change doesn't come in fireworks. It comes in small things, like letting Peppermint Butler run things for a while, or accepting help from citizens she once thought incapable, or simply admitting she was wrong. And through it all, she remains deeply loved. Not because she's perfect, but because she never gives up. Because even when her methods are flawed, her intention, her heart is real. The Candy people may be naive, but they feel things deeply. They don't just cheer for PB. They adore her. They sing songs about her. They paint her face on murals. They rush to her aid even when they're scared. And maybe that's the real currency of politics in the Candy Kingdom. Not votes or laws or revolutions, but affection. A gentle, gummy kind of loyalty. Soft and sticky, but unbreakable. And maybe that's why PB fights so hard to protect it. Because even though she built this kingdom molecule by molecule, what really holds it together is something science can't measure. Love. Not just between ruler and people, but within the kingdom itself. A community of fragile souls learning, slowly, sweetly, to live, to care, to grow. And so PB, for all her flaws, becomes more than a ruler. She becomes a steward, a guardian. A quiet, exhausted heart holding the weight of 100 joyful voices. It's not perfect, but it's hers. And it's home. So here we are, at the edge of all that's known. Princess Bubblegum has led her kingdom through war, revolution, heartbreak, and rebirth. She's built and rebuilt society, walked the line between science and soul, and faced the darkest parts of herself with more grace than most would dare. And yet, her story still feels unfinished. Not because it's missing anything, but because that's the nature of someone like her. Always moving, always experimenting, always preparing for what's next. What lies ahead? For the Candy Kingdom, for the land of Ooh, for her? It's a question that looms over her like the soft hum of a reactor left running in the dark. Always present, always pulsing. Let's drift into that unknown together. There's a strange calm in the later seasons of Adventure Time, a kind of quiet before the cosmic storm. The stakes feel higher, not just in battles, but in choices. In what kind of world will be left behind? Princess Bubblegum begins to see her reign not as a fixed chapter, but as a bridge between chaos and possibility. She starts planting seeds, not literal ones, although maybe those too, but seeds of change, quiet adjustments, less control, more community. She's older, wiser, and finally, not so afraid to be soft. There's a moment, if you remember, when she finally steps away from her title, not because she's overthrown, not because she's forced out, but because she chooses to. That's monumental. It means she's no longer ruled by fear. For so long, her leadership was about preventing collapse. But in stepping down, if only briefly, she proves that she believes in her people's strength to carry on. That maybe, just maybe, she's no longer the only one who can keep the kingdom together. And isn't that the mark of a truly great leader? Not how long they rule, but what they leave behind. So what does Bubblegum leave behind? Well, let's look at the threads. First, the candy people. Once scattered, aimless creations with childlike minds, they've grown, slowly, unevenly, but meaningfully. There are glimpses of independence, of leadership, of curiosity that wasn't programmed in. They're not just adorable sugar blobs anymore. They're a society, one with customs, culture, even a bit of healthy rebellion. And that is Bubblegum's doing. She didn't just make candy people, she raised them, in her own strange, protective way. And though she might never say it aloud, there's love baked into every peppermint butler, every cinnamon bun, every terrified little gumball guardian. Second, the alliances. PB didn't always get along with her neighbors. The Fire Kingdom, the Ice Kingdom, the Nightosphere. They were more often rivals than friends. But over time, something changes. She stops trying to out-invent everyone, stops treating diplomacy like a puzzle to be solved, and instead she listens. She begins to understand that science is not enough, that relationship is its own kind of technology. Messy, illogical, but deeply powerful. She repairs bonds with Marceline. She stops seeing Finn as a tool and starts trusting him like a true friend. She even begins to accept that not everything can or should be controlled. Those changes ripple outward. Third, and perhaps most mysterious, her legacy in the fabric of time. We know that the world of Ooh is always shifting. Civilizations rise and fall. Empires crumble. New life emerges from the weirdness of magic and mutation. But somehow, the Candy Kingdom endures. Even in the far-flung future, there are echoes of Bubblegum's influence. Names, structures, science, sweetness. She's not forgotten. Because she prepared for the future. Layered protections, buried backups. Even in her absence, there's design. There's intention. It's a strange kind of immortality. Not just surviving, but shaping what comes next. And yet, even with all this planning, all this foresight, we get the sense that PB is still learning, still wondering what the next step looks like. Her story isn't about reaching a final form. It's about constant adaptation. Because science doesn't sleep, and neither does love. And perhaps the most beautiful part of Princess Bubblegum's future is that she won't face it alone. There's something incredibly tender about the idea that Princess Bubblegum, for all her towering intellect and accomplishments, still relies on the people around her to shape her path forward. Because the truth is, no ruler, no scientist, no creator can stand entirely alone. And in Bubblegum's case, it's the presence of others that softens her sharper edges, that keeps her grounded even as her mind races galaxies ahead. And perhaps no relationship has shaped her more than her bond with Marceline. That relationship, subtle, complex, and quietly revolutionary, isn't just a romance. It's a tether to her past, and an invitation to a different kind of future. Marceline reminds her of who she was before the weight of leadership, before responsibility consumed everything. Around Marcy, she's not a ruler, not a mother to a kingdom, not a brain forever buzzing with equations. She's just Bonnie-Belle, a girl who loved music, a girl who made mistakes, a girl who wanted to be seen. And in the later chapters of their story, we start to see what a shared future might look like. Not in big declarations or perfect harmony, but in quiet moments. A walk through a quiet forest. A shared laugh under a candy-colored sky. A look that says, I see you, I know you, I still choose you. That kind of connection doesn't just impact Bubblegum's personal journey. It influences how she leads, how she chooses vulnerability, how she opens up her world to a little more magic and a little less control. And if we're looking to the future, that shift is everything. Because it means that the next version of the Candy Kingdom might not be built on absolute order, but on shared purpose. Let's imagine, just for a moment, what the future could be. Maybe the Candy Kingdom evolves into a collaborative society where inventions are made by collectives instead of one mind. Maybe Peppermint Butler trains a new generation of candy scholars who blend magic and science with wonder and care. Maybe young gumball citizens grow up seeing Princess Bubblegum not as an untouchable icon, but as a mentor who once stepped aside, who made space for others, who trusted them. That trust is the seed of true legacy, because even the most brilliant systems fail if no one believes in them. And belief, that comes from presence, from kindness, from consistency. And we know PB has that in her now. She's learned it, earned it. And beyond her kingdom, beyond even Ooh, there's a bigger world. One where new empires rise from the ruins of old magic. One where the stars are no longer out of reach. One where time loops and bends, and maybe somewhere, somewhen, another version of Bubblegum exists. A paralleler, a version with different choices, different outcomes. But here, in this version, she's moving forward, letting go of perfection, embracing uncertainty. Because when you've lived for centuries, when you've made and unmade a kingdom with your own hands, you start to realize something profound. The future isn't a formula. It's a feeling. And right now, that feeling is hope. Of course, challenges will come. No future is free from struggle. But now, PB isn't facing it alone in her lab at midnight, surrounded by monitors and calculations and regrets. She's facing it with allies, with loved ones, with lessons learned, and with a heart that finally beats for something beyond survival. There's beauty in that. In knowing that the future of Ooh doesn't depend on one mind, but on many. On laughter, on rebellion, on music, on forgiveness. On the quiet courage to say, I don't know what comes next, but I'm here. And Bubblegum? She is here. Still growing. Still dreaming. Still loving in her strange, clumsy way. Still watching the horizon, not with fear, but with curiosity. What lies ahead? Maybe peace. Maybe progress. Maybe just another strange day in a candy-colored world. Whatever it is, she'll meet it with a steady gaze, a sharpened mind, and finally, a heart wide open. And perhaps the greatest sign of growth is that Princess Bubblegum no longer needs to have all the answers. Once upon a time, she would have bristled at ambiguity. She'd dive into blueprints, draft contingency plans, and build fail-safes for every possible scenario. Every corner of the Candy Kingdom was calculated, charted, and controlled, because that was her way of keeping the chaos out. But now, she can sit with the unknown. Let it breathe. Let it unfold. That doesn't mean she stopped building or stopped planning. Oh no, the mind of Bonnabelle Bubblegum will never stop worrying. But now there's space between the gears. Space for others to contribute. Space for failure. Space for surprise. And that's when life starts to feel real. Let's imagine her future in these quiet moments. She's in her lab, not alone, but with young candy scientists by her side, teaching, listening, encouraging. The lab is no longer a bunker, but a classroom. She's at a council meeting, not dictating, but deliberating, hearing out her citizens, letting their ideas shape policy, letting community guide decision. She's at a concert with Marceline, head leaned on shoulder, eyes half closed, just soaking in the sound. No war, no crisis, no deadline. Just now. These are the seeds of the future. Not grand monuments or inventions, but habits of care. Princess Bubblegum has always been a genius, but now she's something even rarer, present. And from that presence, the future blooms. And if we pull back even further, beyond her personal world, beyond the borders of the Candy Kingdom, we find a universe that continues to expand. Cosmic forces still swirl, weirdness still reigns. Time still loops and skips and stretches in strange, delicious ways. But PB is ready for all of it, not because she's certain, but because she's willing to face it, with open eyes and a steadier heart. We might wonder, what kind of queen will she be 100 years from now? Or will she even be a queen? Maybe she'll be a wanderer, a teacher, a quiet guide who watches from afar and smiles as the next generation takes the wheel. Or maybe she'll rebuild again on some distant shore with new materials and new dreams. But wherever she goes, whatever shape she takes, she'll carry the lessons of the past. She'll remember her mistakes. She'll cherish her loves. And she'll continue to learn, because that's who she is. The story of Princess Bubblegum doesn't end in a throne room or a laboratory or even a final act of heroism. It ends in continuity, in the knowledge that the world will keep spinning and she will keep adapting, loving, failing, trying again. And that's the truest kind of legacy. Not perfection, but presence. Not invincibility, but resilience. Not ruling, but guiding. She's taught us that you can be brilliant and flawed, that you can be powerful and afraid, that you can make mistakes and still be worthy of love. So maybe as you lay back tonight, eyes drifting closed, thoughts gently untangling, you can carry some of that with you. The idea that growth is never over, that the future isn't something to fear, it's something to shape moment by moment, that the best leaders and the best people are the ones who never stop learning how to love better. And maybe, just maybe, you'll dream of soft pink skies and gumdrop cities and a queen who finally let herself be held. Sleep well, traveler. The story isn't over. It's just continuing. Let's imagine a moment far into the future. Not one full of tension or danger, but stillness. A twilight hour, the Candy Kingdom glowing in gentle amber hues. On a quiet balcony, Princess Bubblegum gazes out, not over a battlefield or a blueprint, but a blooming garden. A space she once reserved for experiments is now filled with wild, untamed candy flora, tended by young learners she once mentored. There's peace in her posture, a softness in her eyes, a recognition that not everything beautiful can be built. Some things simply grow if given time. It's a far cry from the driven, isolated girl scientist she once was. She no longer tries to outwit fate at every turn, nor control the chaos of life. She's become a steward, a listener, a believer in the unpredictable magic of others. And within that transformation lies the most astonishing truth of all. The future is not hers to dictate. It belongs to everyone. For centuries, she tried to shape a world in her image, but now she's shaping herself to fit into the world as it truly is, messy, emotional, wonderfully uncertain. And in that choice, there's hope. She still keeps her tools, her gadgets, her beakers, her scrolls of formulas, but she reaches for them differently now, not as shields, not as weapons, but as brushes to paint the next chapter, together with others. Perhaps that's the final secret of Princess Bubblegum, that behind the logic and science and intellect, there was always a quietly beating heart, waiting for permission to dream not just of the future, but with it. And as Ooh grows and the stars slowly shift, and the next age of discovery dawns, Princess Bubblegum will still be there. Not always at the center, maybe, but always present, always contributing, always watching with wonder as the world changes, not in spite of her, but because of the love she finally allowed herself to feel and to give. And maybe that's all any of us are doing, finding our way toward a future that doesn't need to be perfect, just shared, just real, just ours. So as you drift off tonight, let her story remind you. It's okay not to know exactly where you're going. It's okay to learn slowly. It's okay to change, to feel, to try again. Because like Princess Bubblegum, you're part of something bigger, a story still unfolding, a future not yet written. And who knows? Maybe tomorrow you'll invent something, or heal something, or forgive someone, or let yourself rest, knowing that the world will keep turning and you are enough. Good night, friend. The kingdom is safe. The stars are out. And the story continues.